Casting the first stone seems to be a favourite pastime in many Christian circles. The term is taken from John chapter 8, where a woman is caught in adultery, and the scribes and Pharisees bring her to Jesus, hoping to trip him up, catch him out. Welcome to the channel. I trust that God is truly blessing you. And today is the 3rd of February 2026. So, casting the first stone. This message really came about because of a film that I watched, a film documentary that I watched just a few days ago, maybe 4-5 days ago. And the film centred around, and it was real life, it centred around a number of women in the United States who were on death row awaiting execution. In fact, all of them were within about 25-30 hours of their execution. And as I watched that documentary, you get to actually know a little bit about the women, and you certainly get to know their story, their life story, especially growing up. In every single case, these women grew up in abject poverty, violence, abuse in the home, leading to violence and abuse with their husbands, lots of alcohol, drugs, and really just a pitiful, pathetic existence. And somewhere along the line, they make some bad decisions, and I'm certainly not going to try and justify the crimes, but it's the background that really jumped out to me, and I felt the Lord was saying something to me. And all their crimes, like I say, were horrific. And the more I watched this movie, the more it got me thinking about what's been happening in all of our nations for many, many years, or most nations, certainly in the Western world. What has happened has actually been engineered. Cheap booze, the bringing in of so many different types of drugs, and people very young getting addicted and totally reliant on these substances. Cheap booze making it very cheap, obviously, to buy the stuff if you can't get a hold of the drugs. And like I say, this was engineered. And so for many people who get caught up very young in these types of situations, before they even really start life, get an education and maybe get a job, get a career, they are hamstrung, they are hampered before they even reach any level of maturity in their life. And so their life just becomes an abject misery. And I've seen this many times in my home nation of Scotland. I've seen it in Australia, I've seen it in New Zealand, and I've seen it in other nations firsthand. So it was a deliberate thing to suppress people, to get them into such a situation that really there is no hope for them. That's the way they think. There is no future, there is no hope, and it becomes like a sort of normal thing. The younger you start into this type of lifestyle, it becomes very natural, it becomes very normal. You wake up first thing in the morning, you reach for the drink, you reach for the drugs, you turn to crime eventually to feed your habit. And sometimes these crimes become the worst of crimes, and you end up in the situation that these women ended up in. But again, just watching that documentary, there was no anger in me. I was actually overwhelmed almost with depression. And I was reminded of a song by a guy called Neil Diamond, and it's called Song Sung Blue. And it, there's a line in that song, and it actually says that, just try to think of the verse now, the lyric, we're all subject to the blues now and again. Depression, feeling low, feeling a bit hopeless. And that is the feeling that I was getting. Just, I can't explain it, but I really felt God was saying something to me through this. These women never had a chance from day one. They just never had a chance because the environment they find themselves in, and people all around the world, it's an engineered environment. It's been structured in that way to suppress many people. Look around the world today. There are millions like this, millions completely reliant on their government just for their subsistence. And many often, when they get their weekly dole check or whenever it comes, the first place they head is usually the pub. No thoughts of a future, no plans, no hope. So, going back to the movie, there was a very high ranking prison official who was interviewed in specifically with one particular woman who was just about to be executed. And the interviewer asked this high ranking official, says, does she deserve it? And he just looked directly into the camera and he said, I am not going to be the first one to cast the first stone. And that really hit me. It hit me very, very hard and it made me think deep. Like I say, this was like a sort of process, just looking at what's happened to our nation with the way things have deliberately been brought in to keep the people suppressed, to keep them in poverty, naturally leading to addiction and violence. And like I say, in the cases of these women, the um, death sentence, they were about to be executed. And you actually did get to see, although it was kind of faded out a bit, but they actually did show you a couple of the executions. And it's a horrible, horrible thing to watch because some of these women were only in their 30s. They had children, they had family, mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, and it is traumatic watching as the family come in as to be witnesses to watch these executions. But like I said at the start, casting the first stone seems to be a very popular thing in Christian circles, and it's also popular in the world at large. Certainly, I can say from experience that I was possibly one of the worst at that. Everything was black and white to me, and I was very, very, very quick to pick up that first stone. I was eager. I wanted to be the one at the head throwing the first stone. But it's amazing how God can work in you and life experiences can teach you so many things. Now, I just want to point out this doesn't mean to say we justify sin. It doesn't mean to say we cover it up. It doesn't mean to say we don't call it out. Of course we do. But I think all of us need to pay really careful attention to the way we come to decisions, the way we come to our judgments, because as it says in Scripture, in fact, I believe it's in, let me just look, it's in John 7:24, actually the chapter just before the woman caught in adultery, who's going to cast the first stone. But John 7:24 says, do not judge according to appearance, but judge with righteous judgment. Let's be very careful with the way we treat each other, and especially strangers. We don't know nothing about their story. We don't know anything about their upbringing, but we're so quick to pick up that first stone. Let's judge with a righteous judgment, because the scripture also says, with the measure that you judge, you'll be judged back. So I'll finish on this, friends. There is an event or a few events that are very, very close to happening now. And many of us are going to rethink our entire lives, our very existence. No, I'm not exaggerating. It is going to be so monumental that things that we think right now are very important are going to pale into insignificance. They're not going to mean anything. I think maybe what I'm trying to say through this is for a person that had so much judgment in them. Let's think about loving each other much, much more. Again, we don't justify, we don't cover up, we don't hide sin. But I think there is a distinct lack of love in the church, certainly in the world at large, but that's being mirrored in the church. So I'm going to stop it there. That's a bit of food for thought. God bless you all, and I'll catch you next time. Bye bye for now.